This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former Lieutenant Governor Dennis Wicker, John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, and former legislator Connie Wilson. Well, as the temperatures have risen outside, so are those inside state government. Our lawmakers want to go home, but there's work to be done. On this week's show, we're going to talk about where things stand on the budget, especially Medicaid and teacher pay. And of course, we asked the panel to tell us something we don't know, so let's get started. House and Senate conferees went to work this week on negotiating differences between their budgets in hope of reaching an agreement before the July 1 start of the new fiscal year. There were lots of big disagreement points, especially in the area of how much to put in reserve to pay for Medicaid cost overruns next year and over the teacher pay issue. The House and Governor appeared to pull an end run on the Senate as the House decided to pass a mini-budget, if you will, to amend the budget passed in 2013 and due to go into effect next week. Connie, the Governor and Speaker Tillis called a press conference Wednesday, announced they were going to present these ideas and put them before the full House. Now, the assumption most observers reached was that the differences between the House and the Senate were so great in the budget negotiations that there just wasn't any chance to resolve them anytime soon. Is that a good reason or an explanation for what happened?
I think what we see going on right now is that there are such disparities, not only in the policy issues, but also in the basic assumptions of what the deficits are in the Medicaid budget and how much money the lottery will bring in, that the Senate's been doing their deal with bringing in the Lottery Commission folk and having them talk and having, Art Pope come in and speak from the budget office. And this is basically the House's response on how they want to frame the issue.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this Medicaid reserve issue. John, Senator Jerry Tillman said that trying to get accurate numbers on Medicaid was like nailing Jell-O to a tree. The Senate wanted to put $180 million in reserve next year because we've had so many cost overruns on Medicaid. And in fact, this week there was an announcement that there was in fact a shortfall for this current year for Medicaid. The House wanted less money in there. What's the problem with the House just using the Senate's larger number?
Well, the two sides and both the legislature and then the budget office disagree about the size of this Medicaid shortfall. There's also a little bit of a semantic difference there. In one budget, they had money that was put directly into Medicaid. This was in the Senate budget to cover the hole, and in the House budget, they didn't put as much money directly into Medicaid, but they had a reserve that was to be used for that if it was necessary. The senators still insisted the middle of last week when the House sort of mini-budget proposal came out, the senators insisted that it was way below what was necessary for a balanced budget because of the numbers they were citing that had very large amounts of Medicaid money owed to hospitals and other providers. Unfortunately, it looks like those Senate numbers were simply wrong, simply mathematically incorrect, and that led to this dispute that kind of escalated into a personal dispute when it really should have been hashed out by staff in a very dispositive, calm manner some days earlier.
Chris, let's go to the, we keep having these budget deficits on Medicaid, cost overruns, whatever you want to call them. Is this because of mismanagement over at DHHS? Is it because of the NC Tracks IT program that we put in? Is it because of fallout impact from Obamacare? What is it, or is it all of the above?
I think it's a combination of all the things, but one of the things, a lot of people blame the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare because people who are eligible now, remember, they didn't change the eligibility, we didn't expand Medicaid. These are people who are elderly, blind, disabled, pregnant women, and so forth, who weren't enrolled are now enrolled, and that has increased the cost of the program. I think that's a good thing if we have a pregnant woman somewhere who's eligible for Medicaid and not able to get health care, that she's getting it. So that's part of the cost.
And they're in larger numbers than what we would have predicted.
That's part of the cost, and we didn't really know how many were going to sign up. That's part of the cost. But there has been mismanagement at HHS. There has been problems with the computer program. So it's a combination of all those things. But I don't think that's the only thing holding up the budget. I mean, I think there is now some animosity between the House and the Senate. It's interesting that the governor and the House are sort of standing together. I thought it was fascinating that after this House's mini budget, Senator Berger sharply criticized the whole idea, saying they're doing this in private. We need to have these meetings in public, which is a little ironic since the Senate put their whole budget together in private and never had one public meeting.
Dennis, I want to get to the teacher pay aspect of this, because this was the other big thing that was kind of hanging up these budget negotiations and reaching some agreement. Everybody will remember the Senate proposed an average 11% teacher pay increase, but they were going to take away tenure and remove 7,000 teacher assistant positions. The House had a flat 5%, but they didn't remove tenure. They didn't remove the assistants. The governor had 2%. In this proposal this past week, the House again continued their 5% and essentially told the Senate, here's the deal, take it or leave it, didn't he?
Well, you know, Connie is so nice about how she describes what's going on in the General Assembly, but I think what happened this week with the governor and the House with their plan was sort of an in-your-face to the Senate. Those kind of games go on, and I think that the Senate reacted as Chris described. I actually believe that teacher pay is not really a big issue. They're closer than maybe they want to let you think. But they're going to probably play through these games. I think the risk today was the governor siding with the House. I think that enhanced the risk that maybe the Senate might take the position, you know what, we got a budget, and we'll just head on home.
I want to explore this a minute, because both Connie, you and Dennis have been through these conference committee negotiations and so forth like that. Picking up on the point that you made, the House kind of drew a line for the Senate and said, I dare you to step over it, and was trying to put the Senate into a box and make them either agree to their 5% pay increase or go home without giving teachers a pay raise. Now, the guys over in the Senate have been around the block a time or two, and isn't it normal to expect that they're going to have a game of their own and they're going to come back with some sort of proposal of their own in this, Connie?
Well, they do have an appropriation committee meetings that are occurring, even though they don't have bills at this point in time. They will continue doing their spin and trying to work the issue the way they need to. I will say that the governor has really sided with the House a lot on budget issues and other issues. In fact, those two have been much closer than the Senate and the governor's office. So this is something where the House and the governor are together on education. They've also been together on Medicaid, and you can see that with Representative Nelson.
All right, well, let's be honest about this. The Senate can't let the House win in this situation. So they're going to want something of their own to be able to claim some victory on. My suspicion is they'll give on the House pay raise if the House will give on the Medicaid projections. Is that right, John?
Well, maybe, or the Senate may still insist on the education side. We wanted to have larger raises funded by repositioning those funds for teacher assistants, and we wanted those larger raises to essentially buy out tenure. So House, Governor, why don't you give us one of those? I mean, I think that's a relevant demand by the Senate, and I think they really strongly believe that now is the time to resolve the tenure problem so that poorly performing teachers can be removed from the classroom.
But interestingly, the governor at his press conference said he was opposed to cutting teacher assistants and adamantly opposed to pairing elimination of tenure with the pay increase. So it'll be interesting to see if either one of those happen, what the governor says about it.
And remember, at Medicaid, Phil Berger expressed some very strong feelings this past week about that Medicaid should be a separate department, and that we ought to let it stand alone. And I think that he is pretty far out there on that issue.
I want to continue this discussion after we take our break. For those of you saying you'd like to have more NC Spin, I've got good news for you. You can have additional video content from our panel and other leading opinion makers, all on our website, ncspin.com, all during the week. After each show, we tape what we call the after spin. Our panelists tell you what they wish they'd said on the show, as well as give some comments on other topics. In addition, we have NC Spin Perspectives posted throughout the week in print and video, so keep up by visiting ncspin.com. You can also catch us at NC Spin on Facebook and at NC Spin Tweets. Balanced debate for the Old North State. Back with more on the budget negotiations.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Baseball players from other countries are considered guest workers here. Baseball, the previous administration and Congress cut a deal in 2006 allowing foreign players to travel freely across the country. Not so for agriculture guest workers. They're vilified for doing work Americans won't, and they face a mountain of red tape just to get here. Shouldn't American agriculture get the same consideration as baseball? Farm Bureau and Agriculture, we keep North Carolina growing.
Your family physician supports Medicaid reform. That's good for North Carolina patients, providers, and taxpayers.
For over a year, we've worked with the governor and the General Assembly on a plan for responsible Medicaid reform.
The Senate's proposed Medicaid changes are a departure from this plan. Changes that could lead to a decrease in the number of primary care physicians providing care in communities that need them the most.
The destruction of our state's medical home network, a network that prevents unnecessary hospital and emergency room visits,
and disregards the elderly, the blind, and disabled, and the health care they need. Care we're morally and legally obligated to provide.
Now is not the time to disregard the progress we've made. Now is the time for lawmakers to implement responsible Medicaid reform that protects and improves health care for all North Carolinians.
Visit rnchealthcare.com and tell your lawmaker to support responsible Medicaid reform.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
I want to continue our conversation that we were talking about with the budget negotiations and what may be taking place there. Okay, let's go through some scenarios of what might happen here. So the House has passed this mini package, this alternative, this amended budget, call it whatever you want to call it, and they've dumped it over in the Senate. Now the Senate's got several options, one of which is that they can agree with the House, obviously. One is they can come back with some alternative proposals. One, which was talked about quite a bit during this past week, is that they can just close up and go home. Dennis, that happened once before. If you remember, Mark Bassnight did this.
It's a realistic risk. And I will tell you, the other option it could happen is that the Senate just lets it sit there and bake in the sun a while, because the President pro tem in the Senate has made a political calculation, and it is this, that Speaker Tillis needs to get out of town so he can campaign for the U.S. Senate. The longer they're in session, the more they think he's going to be sweating it out on trying to get out of Raleigh. That, I think, is their leverage, and I will tell you it's a very strong point with them.
Follow that, Connie. How is this session helping Tom Tillis in his efforts to get elected U.S. Senate? It seems to me like there's as much liability here as there is advantage to him being House Speaker.
Tom is very adept at working with issues and maneuvering through, but you never know when something's going to blow up. I think what's more important is that he's not out there to campaign 100% and fundraise 100%. It's a big state, it takes big money, and when you're kind of stuck in Raleigh, and he's got to be there, and he's there every day working. He's doing what he's supposed to be doing and leading the caucus. It's hard to serve two masters at the same time.
So what's our best thinking now as to what's likely to happen here, Chris?
Well, I think that they can come to an agreement on the size of a teacher raise. I think how they fund it. If they continue to disagree about the Medicaid money, that means they have to make other budget cuts. I think it's
Does that mean the Senate gives up on tenure?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult for the Senate to push tenure, although there's probably some language they can use to set up a new study or some new way to do it for
2015.
Or some kind of plan like that. I don't know. The key is how much money they're going to have available for Medicaid, and which means they're going to have how much money they're going to have to pay teachers. And I think
Chris has put his finger on the big issue, John, and that is, where's all this money coming from? Senator Apodaca said this week they had an availability of $450 to $500 million. He didn't explain where it came from, but
most of that is either revenue. Remember that this is the first year in many years that the expenditures actually came in below the number and the revenue came in above the number, and so they actually have some overage and they have some reversions. and they expected growth from for next year. The discussions earlier in the year about budget holes had to do with the overage isn't as big, but it was still an overage. I think that there is a deal to be made here. I think that the teacher pay, as you say, is not that far apart, that they do have to pay for what they do if they're going to put more money into Medicaid. The Senate is saying, look, we had some other budget cuts, let's go with those. I still think there's a good chance of a deal in the not-too-distant future, and I don't believe the idea the legislature will go home. I think both chambers want to be on record enacting that teacher pay increase.
How much
year.
of the budget that was actually passed in 2013 and is supposed to go into effect this coming week is actually going to go into effect, or is it going to be an entirely rewritten budget?
Most will go into effect.
Most of what was passed in 2013.
And for Medicaid,
just with these amendments.
Yeah, for Medicaid, you have the argument of the dollar difference, but then there's also the policy issue on how you reform Medicaid. And the House and the Senate are diametrically opposed in that issue. And if the
Connie,
House...
that's a wonderful segue to where I wanted to go.
Well, I'm glad I could help you, Tom.
Thank you very much, because we talked about this Medicaid issue, and included in it is a Medicaid reform package, which the House has passed. Theirs follows sort of an accountable care model that doctors and hospitals have wanted, and gives care providers a per patient per month set amount. But it also puts providers on notice, which is, I think, sort of a bone to the Senate, that if that sum's not enough, they're going to have to make up the cost difference by 2020. Dennis, does the House Medicaid reform plan have enough of a spoonful of sugar for the Senate to swallow it? Will they accept this Medicaid reform package, or is this just something that the House has passed and now it's on the table and we'll look at it again in 2015?
We have seen so many Medicaid packages and plans. I don't know if we can keep up with all of them, quite frankly. I don't believe that's enough to get the Senate to accept the House Medicaid reform plan. I have contended all along that it's going to be very difficult to even get a reform package out of the General Assembly this summer. I'd be very surprised if they do get one, Tom. There's still some major differences between the House and the Senate on that reform package. Here it is, the 1st of July. I'm going to stick by my earlier prediction that they will go home without a package, and they will fund Medicaid close to what they think the overage may be.
John, you've been one who said that there's going to be some Medicaid reform coming out of this short session. So what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think there is some Medicaid reform built into the two budgets, separate from whether you do accountable care organization or managed care as the way to get costs down over the next several years. They actually made changes last year and made changes this year in Medicaid that constitutes the beginning of reform. I think that the House did move towards the Senate by putting these accountable care organizations more at risk. The problem is that doesn't really happen in any significant way for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. That's too long. The Senate is arguing we can't wait that long to get these numbers under control. And so I think the House did move in the direction, but they're probably going to have to move a little bit further.
All right,
and
so
the Senate's going to have to come meet them.
Chris, okay, so let's assume that the Senate's not going to pass this House Medicaid reform package. My understanding is that after the legislature adjourns sine die, this is dead bill, and so in 2015 we got to start all over again. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I think there'll be money there was money in the House budget, for example, to continue a study, to keep looking at this. I think the activity on this will continue, and they'll try to do some more groundwork before 2015. But I don't think they'll do much this session. This will not keep them in Raleigh. I put it that way. The money will, and how much to fund it, but they will not hang around trying to come to a compromise on Medicaid reform.
Another issue which might involve a carryover in the legislature is the coal ash spill legislation that the Senate passed, and we're going to take that up right after these messages.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Hi, I'm Linda Loveland. I want the best for my kids. Feeding them foods they like within my budget is a priority. But what do we really know about these foods? North Carolina farmers and food experts give you a website to find it all. FeedTheDialogueNC.com, a place where moms like you and me can learn more about the foods we eat and the farmers that feed us. Check it out. Add your input and help feed the dialogue. Let's talk food at FeedTheDialogueNC.com.
CCANC is an organization that really tries to help everybody enjoy their moments fishing. They try to help create awareness They also work on trying to protect our resources so that it'll be there for our children as well.
I think another consistent theme that we all have is we want to leave the resource in better shape than we found it.
You know, CCA do so many different things, be it a habitat project, restoring moistures, maybe working for good conservation and good management, going fishing and sharing a passion for a healthy resource.
There's plenty of fish for everybody. There's fish for the commercial guys, there's fish for recreational guys, if it's managed in an effective and scientific way.
We have that world record style fishery here, but we've got to make science-based management the future of our fisheries management policies, and then we'll be moving forward, and our legislature needs to know that.
Become a member today at ccanc.org/join.
North Carolina's fight to keep rivers clean from coal should be free from politics, but Roy Cooper just can't help himself. Even Democrats are saying Roy Cooper's playing petty politics when it comes to coal ash. After telling polluters for years they could continue to pollute North Carolina waters, Roy Cooper's now playing politics as usual with coal ash. Roy Cooper should clean up his act and stop playing petty politics with North Carolina's water. Learn more at carolinarising.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
The coal ash spill that occurred in February may not have been in the headlines a lot recently, but behind the scenes there's been a lot going on with a federal investigation and negotiations with Duke Energy for cleanup and with the Diener folks. The Senate introduced a new bill that would require Duke Energy to stop pumping coal ash into water-filled pits by 2019 and close all the dumps across the state within 15 years. Chris, the Senate President Pro Tem turned this bill a cap and seal elimination bill. What's your reaction to the Senate?
Well, I think it's a step in the right direction. I think there's some concerns about it doesn't require Duke to actually take the coal ash out of all the leaking coal ash ponds and put them in lined landfills, as is the case in South Carolina, is one issue. The second issue is there was an amendment offered on the Senate floor to not allow Duke to force the ratepayers to pay for the cleanup of the Dan River spill. And we've heard all along some people said it's a cost of business, but now we've learned in this past couple of weeks that Duke had good reason to know this pipe was leaking. They didn't inspect it, and they should be held liable.
But Connie, the environmentalists say this is way too long to wait to get this taken care of. Duke Energy says, wait a minute, this is too short a time period to be able to get all this done. Where do you stand on that?
It's 103 million tons is a lot of coal ash. And to move it will take years, and then you have all the permit issues. The bill that you see this week is actually very important because it's the first step in another bill that's going to be coming next year. This is more a general year. You have the Coal Ash Commission that's in place that they're going to depend on the experts to come in.
So, Dennis, is it going to pass the House? The Senate passed it. Is it going to pass the House?
Well, I think that it, quite frankly, Tom, I'm not sure. I don't know if it will or not.
What do you think, John? Pass the House?
I think it probably will, yes.
Do you really, before they go home?
Yeah, they need to take action on it right now.
They have to do something to go back home, because when you talk about 33 pounds, almost all these legislators have a pond near them.
In their districts.
Either in their district or near.
Meanwhile, we've got these subpoenas going on, the federal. Does anybody know anything about what's going on with that?
Well, they issued a new round recently to the Utilities Commission, so I think this is going to go on for a while.
Well, and the other issue that you've got is December, the EPA may come out and say that it's a hazardous material. So to go into too much detail waiting for that information to come might be fruitless.
Well, that could just make everything move.
That's exactly
right.
When
we come back, we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Does your North Carolina business or organization have a story to tell? I'm Richard Campbell, and at Carolina Broadcasting and Publishing, we help tell stories that connect you to the people who will respond. We take the time to understand our clients' needs and what makes them unique. We craft their stories through the efficient use of words, images, and videos that resonate with their desired audience. We also know that a good story is incomplete without a call to action. On video, on air, online, and in print, from concept to final production, no one can help tell your story more effectively or affordably than we can. For special introductory offers, visit carolinabroadcasting.com or call 919-832-1416. Again, that's carolinabroadcasting.com. Let us help tell your story today.
Where do you go when you need to know? ANC makes it easy for you to get the information you need to make well-informed public policy decisions. Our members are industry leaders who are ready to share their industry-specific insights with you. Want to hear both sides of the story? ANC members can tell you. Just use the ANC member directory as your guide or call us directly. ANC members have the knowledge, expertise, and perspective you need to create public policies that are good for North Carolina. We are ready for your call.
All right, let's ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. John Hood?
Tom, I often use state-by-state rankings to fill my slot for this. I'll give you another one, but it's not good news for North Carolina. 2 different studies came out last week, one showing that North Carolina had the highest cost for getting your car fixed in the whole country, and the other study, the 3rd worst.
Dennis, tell us something we don't know.
Well, this past week, the PPP, Private-Public Partnership, passed, signed by the governor. I think North Carolina is going to be on the verge of economic expansion, and we're going to be surprised at the results of
Connie,
this
tell us something we don't know.
Interesting bill passed the House this week, a medicinal hemp bill that would help a lot of small children that are having epileptic fits.
Chris, finally, 20 seconds.
The Senate budget ends all funding for driver's education at public schools, which means that families have to turn to private sources, which hurts poor families.
You've heard our spin on the issues today. Stay informed all during the week. Give your feedback. Read our weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, and we hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.